Testing, testing, testing. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. Mike, I'm going to just send you a message in chat here just to see that sound is fine and that there's no issues. Oh, there you go. There's chat. Okay, it's working. Happy days. So we're kicking off in 4 minutes. Okay, cheers. Thanks, folks, for saying that you can hear me clearly. It might be possible that we'll kick off the show without the usual technology gremlins that seem to kick in at the start of every Zoom or Teams meeting that you have these days. So we might be good. It's possible that we've connected the correct volume on the headphones. We'll give it another few minutes. I won't start until everybody's had a chance to get in, and I'm conscious that we're kicking off at 10:30 and that there's been reminder emails that have gone out. I had one person contact me this morning to say that they didn't get the reminder email, but I've since sent the email directly to that person. So I checked emails and I don't think there was a technical issue. So I'm glad to see that some people have managed to find your ways in. So it's all good. Okay. Sound and digital coming through nicely. Okay, cheers. Thanks, Mike. Glad to hear it. It's quite possible that we've managed to fly this on our first effort. So congratulations to you. I'm the one that's standing here talking. Okay, another couple of minutes. We'll run for about an hour. We'll see how it goes. This is the inaugural, the first live streaming webinar from Around Finance. So, and some of the content is content I've been talking about for years, but this actual slide deck I haven't moved through before. So it'll be interesting to see how the timing goes. But I think we'll probably run to about an hour. If there's questions, I'll give out details, and if there's follow-up questions, obviously, you're very welcome to reach out. So there's a bit of ground to cover, so we will start on time. Mike, and we'll record the video, obviously, and we'll send that recording out to people after we've concluded today's session. Okay, let's start. So for those of you who are online at the moment, you're very welcome to the inaugural, the first live streaming from Around Finance. So what I'll do initially is just introduce myself, and what I'll really focus on doing is just moving through the information in a reasonably speedy fashion. There's an hour planned for today's session, but there's a bit of ground to cover, so it'll be interesting to see how we go in terms of timing. So just to kick off, my name is Richie Lennon. I'm an accountant by trade, and my name is Richie Lennon. I'm an accountant by trade. I'm the owner of Around Finance. We're an accountancy practice that's based in Galway City Centre with clients all over the country. We've offices that we use in Dublin also. I've owned around finance it's been up and running for about 10 years. But it's really only in the last few years that I've been increasing my time working in around finance as the practice has started to grow and the team has started to grow. And over the course of the last 10 years, I've complemented my work in the practice with additional work, specifically working quite a bit with the local enterprise offices and Enterprise Ireland. So I would have delivered the New Frontiers programs, phase 1, phase 2, with the finance modules on the phase 1, and well, all the modules really on phase 1s, but more or less, and all the modules on phase 2 programs for New Frontiers, but really focusing on the finance. So really, for those who are not aware, the New Frontiers programs for Enterprise Ireland are entrepreneurship school, whereby if you've got an idea for a startup, you go through a New Frontiers program, and I would have delivered a finance module on those programs for a number of different incubation centres, specifically in Limerick and Galway and Donegal and Limerick and Donegal and Sligo and different parts of Dublin. But so in addition to that, I've also been CFO of a number of organisations, one of which is Kinvara Skincare. I've had a long time involvement there, supporting that business from a financial perspective as it's growing and going on to be quite successful in the Irish market. I'm also CFO of a PR business in Dublin called Alice PR. And the reason why I've highlighted that experience is it gives me an understanding. I think having spent enough time working with the local enterprise offices, working with Enterprise Ireland, and then sitting in CFO seats in, let's say, a services business and also in a product business, gives you an insight in terms of what it is that the business owner is looking at in terms of understanding those businesses from a financial and operational perspective. But in addition to that, I've done quite a lot of facilitating, business consulting, mentoring workshops and things like that. So the things that we're going to talk about today, I was actually thinking of before we started today's session. So we move people through these entrepreneurship programs, whereby at the start it's this ideation, but really all everybody wants to get to, well, one of the highlights of the program at least is the grants and where is the support. So I've kind of reverse engineered it, and I've just put the juicy thing first. And there's been quite a good sign up to today's session, so I'm excited to hear what the feedback's going to be. And the first thing to say in terms of what I'm going to talk about today is that I'm expecting, just looking through the sign up list that we've had, is there's a diversity there in terms of, let's say, different types of businesses. What that means is businesses coming from different sectors, also businesses that are at a different stage on your journey. So you might be somebody that's pre-startup and considering, well, what are the supports that could be there if I was to decide to make the jump? And you might be somebody then also who's a successful business and you're growing, and this grant support could be part of your strategic growth that you're planning ahead in the next 6 months or next year. So there's going to be different profiles of businesses, and it's not possible, let's say, to cater for all types of businesses with enough detail on the grant side on a session like this. So I'm going to try and just move through the grants material probably straight down the middle and just add in some highlights and things I think people should understand as they're starting to consider what their options might be and where the grant supports might be. And of course, it's worth repeating that if you have any questions or follow-ups, then please don't hesitate to reach out. You can get in touch with us on our website. We will record today's session and email it to everybody. We'll also put details and links to anything that I discuss on today's show in the show notes below. This is the first of a series of online webinars that will be coming from around finance. And if you want to be notified of future sessions that we're going to be having, I would ask that you might subscribe to the YouTube channel. So with that said, we'll kick off. So I think for some people, when you start to consider the landscape of what supports might be out there for your business, you ask yourself the questions, well, where is it that I start to look? And it's true to say that there's a range of organizations that exist in Ireland offering a wide range of supports. So you've got, let's say, the local enterprise offices, you've got Enterprise Ireland, Intertrade Ireland is a north-south body. There's Leader, which works in rural areas. There's NDRC, which is super focused on startups. Údarás na Gaeltachta in Gaelic areas, and a Foodworks program, Borbia programs which run for people who are working in the food space. And I'm going to touch on all of these through the course of the next hour or so. And and try and, I suppose, help people understand in the first instance which door you should be knocking on. Because I think one of the mistakes that some people make that I've seen in the past is actually just by knocking on the wrong door and getting frustrated when they're not making progress in terms of getting the right types of support. So what I would suggest is that in terms of figuring out which is the right door to be knocking on, there's two key questions that you need to ask yourself as a business owner. The first question is to ask yourself, there's a geography element to this, is that where am I located? And what are the government agencies that are providing grant supports that could possibly give me the supports based on where I'm located in the country? And the other question you have to ask yourself, well, what is the remit of the government agency? So what is it that EI is looking for when they're trying to identify which businesses they should be giving supports to? What is the LEOs looking for when they're trying to identify which businesses they should give the supports to? So you have to, in the first instance, try and see the world through the eyes of the agency and the development officer working in the agency in terms of what they're looking for in terms of a profile of application that's coming in. I think that's very important. And I'll go on to talk about this in more detail as we move through today's session. But at the very start, I would suggest that if you are intending on progressing an application to any government agency, it's important that you treat them like a partner in your business. And what that means is that there's a relationship that needs to be built. I think sometimes if I talk to people who've had frustrations in terms of trying to get support from different agencies that they might have felt that they should have got but didn't get enough or whatever that might be, often they're trying to shortcut that relationship for whatever reason, but or in some, to be blunt, try and treat the agency like some kind of an ATM, which they're not. So I'll go on to talk about how the process of successfully getting grant funding into your small business or your startup or wherever that might be works. And I'll talk more about in terms of what it looks like to be successful if you were to move forward with an application. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, really what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move through the main agencies that are out there that will, of course, as I said before, there's a wide profile of businesses here, but I'm going to walk through each agency and I'm going to talk a little bit about what grant programs that exist inside of each agency. And I'm going to add more to what I've just said in terms of what are the things that these agencies are looking for. What are they looking for in terms of the profile of business coming in the door? What does it look like to put a successful application together so that you can get grant supports? What should you be looking for? What should you not be looking for? And so on. So the key ones, the two big ones really to deal with from the top is the local enterprise offices and Enterprise Ireland. And that will cover a significant percentage of the people on this call. And there are other ones there which I will highlight towards the latter end of maybe towards the second half of today's presentation. But really the two biggies for most people are going to be the Local Enterprise Ireland and Microfinance Ireland. So with that said, we'll deal first with the local enterprise offices. So I said that two questions you have to ask yourself is, where are you located and what is the remit of the agency that you're beginning to engage with? So the local enterprise offices are located across the country. There's 31 offices in every city for sure, every regional town, right up and down the country. There's LEO offices, and the remit of the local enterprise office is employment essentially. So if you log on to the LEO's website, you click into the About Us section, you'll see what their remit is, and it's to support employment locally. It's essentially what it is, and they do focus also is the LEO can be a catchment agency for businesses that are not yet ready to approach Enterprise Ireland and go on the Enterprise Ireland ladder, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. It's called High Potential Startup, HPSU. So for many businesses, they will find that they're not quite ready to engage with Enterprise Ireland and move towards that fast growing internationally traded business. And those types of businesses would also work and become a client of the local enterprise offices. So the key thing to understand here is that the local enterprise offices are set up to support small businesses that are seeking to grow and employ people locally. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. And they offer a wide range of supports. But as I start to talk through these supports, especially the larger supports, there's vouchers that are relatively easily accessed. But as I start to talk through the types of grants that local enterprise offices offer businesses, it's worth remembering that they are there to try and support businesses who are going to employ people who are going to grow. They'll give grant supports for you to achieve what you want to achieve, but then you come back next year and they'll have a look and see if you've employed more people. So it's important to understand that the context of what the LEOs are looking for in terms of that larger amounts of grant funding is exactly that. So it's worth saying as well from the off is that there's certain types of businesses that local enterprise offices don't support with the bigger grant funds. And specifically, they won't support retail enterprises, which is your hairdressers, gardeners, creches, things like that. They also won't support professional services, which is your accountants, solicitors, marketeers, people like that. So despite me knowing quite a lot about grants, I actually can't get them for the accountancy practice. And the reason for that is this idea of dead weight or displacement. And what that means is dead weight is that the LEOs aren't inclined to fund a business which would have gone ahead anyway without the funding. So it's part of their assessment of the sectors that they want to fund. And the other one is this displacement. So they would look at if you have a fruit and veg shop on one street and then somebody opens up a fruit and veg shop on the next street, well, they're kind of just splitting the customer. So really what they're looking to do is find businesses that are bringing something new to the locality and are going to base themselves locally and grow and employ people. So it's worthwhile understanding that that is what they're looking for. Additionally, it used to be the case that the paperwork was paperwork, but these days, all applications that are submitted to the local enterprise offices are done through their submit platform. And I'll go on to talk about this paperwork piece a little bit more once I've walked down through the grants that are available. The key thing is, the paperwork can be arduous, and it's worth addressing on this call just so you have full visibility in terms of what is required, and it comes back into this, what does a successful application look like, as I start to detail in a short while. So in terms of just understanding, you have to see the world from the LEO's perspective. When you go in, you knock on the door, you'll be assigned a development officer, and the development officer, they won't specifically say these things, but it's true to say that you have to understand that the LEOs themselves are judged, and they have their own internal KPIs in terms of how they've given out their funding, and the funding that they give out, did it go to businesses that were successful? And of the businesses that they funded, how many of them are still alive in 2-3 years' time? And have they employed more people or employed less people? So the LEOs themselves are managed and reviewed in terms of how successful they are in terms of giving out funding to different businesses within their remit. Okay, so with that said, there are a variety of different supports that the LEOs can supply to small businesses. So I think the key ones here, there's different ones that I've just left out because if you go into the LEO, there's other ones around digital lean, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on, and green incentives and different things. But for the purpose of this call, it's better just to focus on what are the key ones. So one of the ones that is most common that a lot of people will actually be aware of is it's the trading online voucher. And the trading online voucher is quite popular because it doesn't have this remit in terms of the LEO only being able to give funding to professional services businesses, or not being able to give funding to professional services businesses or retail businesses and so on. So the trading online vouchers are pretty much open season, and the process of being successful in attaining a trading online voucher is one whereby you go into your local enterprise office, you get in touch with a development officer, they'll send you to a webinar which you must attend, which is approximately 1 hour. And at that point, then you're in a position whereby you can apply for the trading online voucher. Now, the LEO will give you a list of suppliers in that space, but you're welcome to go off and identify your own service providers. There is terms and conditions in terms of the type of spending that the LEO will allow to be spent through an online trading voucher. The key thing here to remember is that they're offering 50% of a €5,000 spend. So, for example, if you spent €5,000 on a website, the LEO would give you a grant of 50% of that, up to a max of €2,500. And you spent €2,500, you get 1,250, and so on. So the business must have a turnover of less than 2 million. And just the key thing to understand in relation to the trading online vouchers is that some of the terms and conditions that are relevant they are very much e-commerce oriented. So if it is the case that you are seeking to be successful in getting a LEO voucher, you must acknowledge that as part of your application form, that there is some element of the website that will be used in an e-commerce manner. It might be the case that you're going to sell branded t-shirts, or it might be the case that you're going to have a full e-commerce offering, but you must understand the remit in terms of what it is that they're trying to support. And the other one is that they'll only allow 30% of the voucher to be, they'll only allow a very small percentage of the voucher to be spent on ad spend, and it can't just be pure PPC for Facebook or Google or something like that. So the trading online vouchers are quite popular because they don't have this constriction in terms of the types of businesses that can apply for them. And that's kind of all you're going to get within that. That doesn't start to be constricted by that remit in terms of the types of businesses that the LEO can support. So in addition to that, the other one which is quite popular is the technical assistance for micro exporters, or commonly known as the TAME grant. And again, that's 50% or €2,500 max of an export marketing plan. So really what that is essentially for is trade shows. So if it is the case that you're planning a trade show this year or next year, you can approach the LEO. You can say, can you help me with some of the cost of heading over to this trade show? So it can include all the costs in relation to the trade show. So the pop-ups, the travel, the hotel, and all those types of spends will be covered by a TAME grant. And I suppose the reason why I started with those two is that they're relatively straightforward in terms of accessing those types of grants. And then we're into the hierarchy of grants that the LEO would offer a small business and the types of business that it wants to support. And at the bottom rung is going to be a feasibility study grant. And the feasibility study grants are for people who are trying to figure out something. Either it can be an already trading business that has an idea and wants to tease it out and wants to spend some time researching and developing a new product, or it can be researching and developing a new market. So the feasibility grant can be equal to 50% of the spend, up to €15,000, which is €30,000 of a spend, of which the LEO can support 15,000 of it. Now, the other thing to say is that the LEOs, in terms of how they work, are almost identical in each of the 31 offices, but there are slight differences. So, like, you get a slight difference in terms of how you engage with the LEO in Galway versus Sligo versus Dublin and so on. So it's worth noting that. So for example, in the south and southwest, you'll get 50% of the grant, whereby in the BMW region, which is Donegal, you'll get up to 60% of a grant. So there's slight differences in terms of the grants that are available depending on where your local LEO is located. So so the feasibility study grants, yeah. So I said it can be new products. So it's like you want to do some research and development. You can be building an MVP. You can be for a new product. It can be market testing. It can be business consulting. It can be market research. But you can also use it sometimes, if again, depending on how open the development officer is to this type of a conversation. But you could use it for like the development of new products looking towards new markets. So you might say, listen, we've been selling in Ireland and we're looking to the new UK. And in order to figure out how we're going to get into the UK, we need to fly over. We need to meet distributors. We got to find some consultants so that they can go out there and have a look and see if there's an opportunity for us. And it's also the case that you can claim some of your own time on that feasibility voucher. So really what that looks like is you gather together the purchase invoices that relate to the feasibility voucher. You also fill out some timesheets, and down the bottom you sign them and you submit those to the LEO, and that's your feasibility voucher. So it's €30,000, of which 50% can be covered by feasibility grant. So it's broad enough that you can, as long as you're doing something new and something that that's not just part of your regular day-to-day trading, it can be positioned in that feasibility study grant. So again, you'd have to work with your development officer. The process there is there's an initial application. They review it. They say that looks okay. Go ahead and do what you need to do, and then come back to us whenever you need to draw it down. So I'll come back to just the process bit just once I've gone through the next two grants. So in the early stages, or there's a feasibility, whether you're successful or not, there is a feasibility study grant that's available. If it is the case that you were coming from a startup, let's say, you would access the feasibility study grant. You might go off and build your MVP. You might build your first product. You've got your early customers are coming in. At that point, you might go back to LEO and say, well, listen, this thing is starting to take off, and it looks like I'm going to be successful, and I've got customers coming in, and I need to try and grow my business. The category of grant that will be available to a business like that is called the priming grant. And that's targeting businesses that are usually less than a year and a half old, the first 18 months of setting up, and they're just starting to get going. And the priming grants are what the primary grants will cover is people, capital, marketing, a little bit of overhead, but not a huge amount. So people, capital, and marketing. So people, what that means is staff. Capital, what that means is plant and equipment. They won't cover movable assets, like they won't give grant support towards a van or something like that, but they'll give you grant support towards a laptop or computer equipment or some machinery that's going into a factory floor or whatever that might be. And also marketing is pretty much an open category, so it can be marketing consultants. And that the advertising spend as a component of the marketing piece of a LEO grant can't represent more than 30% of the overall grant. So for example, if you had a grant of €10,000 within that priming grant, which was going to be spent on marketing, you can't spend more than 3,000 of it on advertising. So it's good to know that. The rest of it can be consultants and strategic stuff in terms of figuring out what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to do what you're going to do. So the people bit is there is a €15,000 there's a €15,000 grant available within the priming grant that will go towards the hiring of staff members. And the key thing is that if you're already trading and you've already hired, so I suppose it's worth pointing out at this stage, so the key thing here in relation to the wages grant, that if you are already trading and you've already hired people and you think you might be somebody who could go and approach the LEO for a priming grant, so even if you haven't had the feasibility grant, but you might be past that, and you're still in the early stages and you haven't approached the LEO for any grant supports, then they probably would look towards a priming grant with you. And unfortunately, if you've already hired somebody on payroll, the LEO won't fund anything which is historic spend. So it's important that you get your ducks in a row. I think it's worthwhile just pausing here and outlining one of the key things that you need to be aware of if you are deciding to engage with the local enterprise office. The way the local enterprise office work is that you walk in, you get appointed a development officer, you have a conversation in terms of what grants it is that you're intending on applying for, you fill out the paperwork, you send in the forms, they review the forms, they come back and say, we've accepted your forms and we're going to have a look through them. And it's either you need to get confirmation from the development officer that the date at which you submitted the application to the LEO, because it's only from that date that you can capture spends that could be included in the grant. So for example, if you put an application into the LEO office on the 30th of June, it's only from the 30th of June or the 1st of July that you can include purchase invoices in relation to the drawdown of a grant that might happen. So it's important that you first get your application in, get your application open, get your application accepted by the LEO. And at that point, then you basically submit the application saying what you're going to do. And then they open up the application and you do what you said you were going to do. You usually have a 12-month period so you would have until the 30th of June 2024, whereby you need to spend what you said you're going to spend. And at that point, then you're into the paperwork process whereby you gather up all the purchase invoices, which should map to what you had in your initial application. And you take out all your purchase invoices and you print off all your bank statements and you get a highlighter and you just go down through them one by one saying, this is the purchase invoice that was in the initial application. This is the line item in the bank. This is the payment. And you have to build a file for LEO, and they'll go through it purchase invoice by purchase invoice and compare it against the original application and say, okay, this is what was approved. This is what was spent. And then at that point, you'll be able to draw down the funding. It's not, that's the mechanism in terms of how the local enterprise work in terms of facilitating priming grants. People seem to have an idea whereby you can walk into the LEO office, get some kind of a verbal agreement that it's possible that you could be fundable from a grant perspective, go off and spend money, and then turn up 3 months later with a basket full of invoices for the local enterprise office. It doesn't work like that. And it's very important that you're aware of the process of how local enterprise office priming grants work, because they also work for the other grants, which is the feasibility and the business expansion grant. So the other thing I would highlight here is that is the local enterprise office, again, of which there are 31 offices, have the capacity to make a decision locally of grant applications which are up to €50,000 of a spend. So that's the total spend. So that's the capital, the people, and the marketing bit of overhead. And if the spend is above that, they have an obligation then to meet, to get them approved by Enterprise Ireland. So what that looks like usually is that once your application for a grant has been submitted, the development officer will take that to an internal committee. If it's lower than 50,000 people, there'll be a couple of senior people in the local enterprise office that will review the case, and then maybe one external person, and they can make a decision on it, and off you go. If it's above 50,000 euros, it has to go through an Enterprise Ireland process, and it's the exception rather than the norm that you will be successful in getting a grant from the local enterprise office, which is in excess of 50,000 euros. Or definitely, so even if it goes through an EI process, anything above 80, like it'll say 150, but it's a rare bird that would get a grant of 150,000 out of the enterprise office. Very rare. And it's just worth knowing that. And the other key thing that you should be aware of is that if it is your intention of as I said before, as the local enterprise office becoming a partner in your business over the next period of time, over the coming years, one of the ways that the local enterprise offices assess future applications for grant support is by looking at the past applications. And what that means is that if you were successful in June 23 of getting a priming grant, and you said that you're going to spend 100,000 euros, and you got through the EI process, and they came back and said, this is a big idea, it's going to be great for the local town, and you're going to hire loads of people, and you're going to buy plant and equipment, and you're going to do what you said you're going to do, and this is all great. So here's your grant approval. If in June 24 you haven't fully drawn down the grant, that would be a negative in any future grant applications. So you come back in 2024 and you said, sorry about that, everything took longer, I couldn't get the money in, there was a guy that promised me he was going to give me money, he didn't turn up, so I couldn't pay my part of the grant, and suddenly we only spent 25,000 euros, or we only spent 50,000 euros. Well, the LEO would say, well, listen, we approved you for 150. We've only got a certain bucket of money that we can approve on an annual basis, and you came to us the last time and we approved 150 and you didn't spend it. So when you go back down looking for a business expansion grant, let's say in year 2, the fact that you had underspent on the priming grant in year 1 would be a negative thing. So it's worth, I would suggest that if you are thinking of approaching the local enterprise office for, let's say, a priming grant, I would suggest that you would have a clear plan for spending over the course of the next 12 months, and that you would include in your grant application in the first instance, rule of thumb, is that it's relatively straightforward to access the 50,000 euros, which is 50,000 euros of a spend, of which you get 25,000 euros support. And even if you spent that over 6 months, you can just close off the application, send in the paperwork to LEO, draw down the priming grant, and then open up a conversation with them about having a business expansion grant. That's a better approach than to go off kind of half prepped, but have enough savvy to put in a really good application and access a larger grant funding, which you can't or won't spend because you haven't got your ducks in a row on the other side. So I would suggest that as an approach in the first instance. Now, that's not for everybody, and I've been involved with lots of businesses who've accessed in excess of 100,000 euros in primary grant funding from the local enterprise office. But if I was to say there's a rule of thumb in the first instance as a default position, it's the 50,000 euros, spend that, build a reputation with the LEO, and maybe go back down and see if there's possibility of a business expansion grant in year 2. And then maybe that's when you would be confident enough that the business is growing that you can go for a larger amount of fundings. Which brings me on to the business expansion grant. So again, the hierarchy of grants here, remember, is this feasibility grant, which is early stage, but you can access if you're already trading, if you've got a new idea or a new product. And then it's on to the priming grant, which is the first 18 months you're trying to grow your business. You want to hire people, you're going to get 15,000 euros for new hires onto the payroll. They won't fund people that are already on your payroll. They might actually include a director. Some LEOs will, some won't. So if you have built the business, but you're not on payroll, you could ask the LEO, listen, I haven't been on payroll in this business. Can I access 15,000 euros of grant support towards my own wages? Some will, some won't. But let's say you've gone through that year and you've drawn down the money, and if it's the 50K or if it's above because that's what you needed and you've been confident enough to spend it, you're coming back down the second year and you're into this or the second grant application, maybe year 2, year 3, and you're having a conversation with the LEO about the possibility of a business expansion grant. And really what that means, so there's a typo on that, so it's after the first 18 months of setting up. So what that means is it's the same mechanism that applied for the priming grant, except it's called a business expansion grant because you're now growing and you're past this first 18-month period. But again, it's 50% of 150,000. And if it's above 50,000, it has to be approved by EI, and 15,000 for each person that you're going to apply, you're going to add to your payroll. So that's kind of it. I'd say in terms of the grant supports that are available through the local enterprise office, if I was to say it's just at this point, the key things I would suggest is just to quickly summarize that the online vouchers are open for everybody. They're relatively straightforward. Read the T's and C's and understand when you're making your application that there are certain types of activities from a marketing perspective that the LEO will fund and won't fund. The TAME, if you're a business and you're heading to trade shows, that they're relatively straightforward to access. Feasibilities, priming, and expansion grants are a higher branch in the tree to climb. And it's worth pointing out that it's usually the initial application can be arduous. It depends if you have a business plan already prepped or not. And the drawdown specifically, it's the gathering together all the paperwork and matching the purchase invoices and highlighting the line item in the bank statement to get your grant file together and sending that down, and that back and forth that starts in terms of, well, you sent me a purchase order and a purchase invoice, and you got to go chase some supplier that you spent money with 8 months ago to give you a purchase invoice because they only sent you a purchase into order. And it's just that paperwork bit at the drawdown that tends to be the hardest part of the whole lot. But that's kind of the process in relation to local enterprise office. So the other key consideration, I think, if you are somebody that's looking for funding, it's worth knowing that the local enterprise office will. There's an organisation in Ireland which is government backed called Microfinance Ireland, and they give small business loans up to 25,000 euros unsecured. And if you are to apply for that loan to the local enterprise office, you will get a 1% discount on the interest rate that's repayable on that loan. So the common approach for somebody who has an early stage idea would be to access the feasibility grant and maybe top it up with a Microfinance Ireland loan to get the other 50% in. And that wouldn't be an uncommon position for somebody who might be short on funds and trying to get a business idea up off the ground. So yeah, it's just worth noting on that. I think in terms of just highlighting, in terms of what's required to access the priming grant and the expansion grant, it's the default paperwork is usually 3 years financial forecast, which is P&L and cash flow. You don't, maybe sometimes a balance sheet, but you can get away without the balance sheet, and a business plan. Now, if you don't have the business plan done, the LEO will give you access to this submit portal, and they'll ask you to fill out a bunch of boxes on that portal. And by the time you've actually walked through that application process, you've effectively written the business plan. So I would say that if you're somebody who's looking to access feasibility priming grant, you haven't invested the time to do a business plan, which can be, again, a laborious and arduous thing for some people to do. You might just jump straight into the LEO application process and fill out the application process as best you can. The alternative there would be to go off and spend time, prepare your business plan. And once you've had that business plan in place, it's literally a copy and paste process in terms of applying for any of the grants that I'm going to talk about on today's session. So you can use the paperwork, use the application process, or you can prepare your business plan and use your business plan then just to copy and paste in terms of any paperwork that's required during the application process. Okay, I think I've touched on all the things I wanted to touch on in relation to the local enterprise office. Next up is Enterprise Ireland. So I think when I said that it's important to understand the remit of the local enterprise office, I said that they're looking for that small local business that's going to employ people, and maybe a business that's not growing fast enough to be internationally trading just yet, but they're on the roadmap and it's possible in a few years' time they might get there. Well, what EI is looking for ideally is businesses that are going to grow from 0 to 10 people, be innovation-led and internationally traded. And it's not that you have to be that, but it's true to say that that's what they're looking for. And I think sometimes people don't quite understand that you're not one of Ireland's HPSUs and you're better off being a client of the local enterprise office. But if you are a type of person who's on this call that could be a potential client of Enterprise Ireland, it's worth noting that they won't support like retail businesses that are importing goods manufactured overseas. So for example, your most e-commerce businesses are maybe importing from China. They've got a website that they're selling something, they're growing fast, they're doing things, but it's just not within EI's remit to support them. They don't tend to look at businesses that are not internationally traded, and most of the Enterprise Ireland supports have a requirement in them that you must have at least 10 employees. Now, there's exceptions there, but if you look at most of the grant supports that are there, most small businesses that I work with will not pass the 10 employees test, which pushes them back into the local enterprise offices immediately. Whereas the local enterprise offices are looking for businesses with less than 10 employees. So there's kind of a cutoff there in terms of the size of business that you might have. Now, there's a whole argument in terms of like how many employees you need to do 1 million in turnover these days with software and so on. But that's so maybe there's an update required there in terms of that profiling of business. But it's important to understand that that's what they're looking for. So in terms of engaging with EI, I mentioned at the start of this call that I've spent quite a bit of time delivering New Frontiers programs. So there's a number of different entry routes in terms of engaging with Enterprise Ireland. The most common one is the New Frontiers program. So if you have a startup idea that you wish to explore, Enterprise Ireland deliver New Frontiers programs in every innovation centre across the country. So every third level campus has an innovation centre, and they run New Frontiers Phase 1 programs, which is pretty much an open door to anybody that wants to go in and have a think and walk through a program and tease out their idea. Phase 2 is competitive and Phase 3 is competitive. But if it is the case that you are somebody who has a startup idea and you're interested in, and you think you could be, now it's not the case that you need to have the 10 employees. Like you can be everybody that goes on a Phase 1, Phase 2 program are usually pre-sales. So it's just at that idea stage. But you could possibly be a profile of business that could be a HPSU business in a number of years' time. So that's quite broad. So you get a broad range of businesses that would attend New Frontiers programs. There's a €15,000 stipend available. The key catch there is that it's a full-time engagement because it's entrepreneurship school. There's long days in the classrooms and trying to get yourself investor ready. Now, everybody that comes out of these programs says that they're one of the best things they could have done for their startup idea, because it really hammers you in different ways to validate your idea, and a lot of the startup thinking around lean startups is applied, and validation at an early stage, and like front loading validation as opposed to spending it on development. And there's lots of really good ideas that happen inside the New Frontiers programs. But the idea there is you get €15,000 of a stipend to turn up for the length of the course. You've got access to the building for a year, but the course will run for 6 months. And the idea there is that you should come out at the end of that 6 months known as what's investor ready. You should have your investor ready business plan, your financials, you should have validated the product, and you should be ready for road. And at that point, it's usually the case that people are starting to think, well, they're looking to raise equity and raise finance to scale and grow their business. And there's just, again, that certain type of profile of business that EI are looking for. There's also within Enterprise Ireland, it's usually the case that people on New Frontiers programs will access what's known as innovation vouchers. So there's actually, each innovation voucher is worth €5,000. The first one is 100% €5,000. And what that allows you to do is it's a private public link whereby a private entity in a New Frontiers program usually, but you can access them outside of that also. You don't necessarily have to be in the New Frontiers program, but you go onto the website and you put in an application, and you will get a third level. You'll get a third level business, a third level institute to do research for you. So you could have a requirement whereby you need research done on a product idea, and what the third level institute will do is they'll spend €5,000 researching that idea, and they'll come back to you with a specification or some kind of findings or material testing or whatever it might be. And it's a really good way of actually getting an early amount of R&D done at an early stage for your startup. So one of the things that's worthwhile knowing there is that it is the requirement that you must have a CRO number, which means you need to be a limited company. So again, you're starting to look towards the types of businesses that they are looking to engage with in terms of with the terms and conditions that they're setting. Now, if you are successful and you've been through the EI process, again, it's worth noting that you don't necessarily have to go through the New Frontiers program and access the innovation vouchers. You can actually just jump in and engage with EI at any stage you can bypass any of these stages. But the normal process will be if somebody's come out of their New Frontiers Phase 2 program, they're investor ready, they're about to they just need another 6 months to test and early validation. There is what's known as the pre-seed startup fund, and that's €100,000, and it's a competitive process. It used to be called the CSF fund up until last year, and they rebranded it as the pre-seed startup fund. The CSF used to have periodic dates where it would come online, whereas the pre-seed startup fund is just online all the time. And again, it's a competitive process whereby you apply and you can access funding in 2 tranches. There's tranche 1 is €50,000, tranche 2 is €50,000. And the idea there is that Enterprise Ireland is investing in your business with the intention of you becoming an HPSU, which is a high potential startup. What the high potential startup means is that you're a business that's starting to grow quickly, and the option then for you as a startup is to raise financing and include Enterprise Ireland as part of that equity raise. So Enterprise Ireland will come in for, let's say, 10% of the money, which is, let's say they've put in the pre-seed startup. They might top that up by a little bit more funding in 6 months' time, and then you'll bring in either a venture capital or private investment, and you'll do your round one of a raise of equity, which is 250, 300,000, 500,000, whatever that might be, in terms of getting you to that pre-seed, getting you to that round one funding. So that's the usual process in terms of engaging with Enterprise Ireland. Somebody's asked, can you access innovation vouchers while it's on New Frontiers Phase 2? Yes, you can. Most people on a Phase 2 program would access innovation vouchers. Like in this startup, in this startup mode, really, in terms of trying to access different pots of cash, like it's usually the case that people would have €15,000 of a stipend while it's on the New Frontiers program, and then they will be accessing innovation vouchers. Like, so the first one is 100%, the second 2 is 50%, 50%. And that would get you some of the way along to your MVP, which is your minimal viable product. And then you can start using that for validation and different things. And if you've validated and you've been successful and you've got a track record of that, it starts to strengthen your case for accessing pre-seed, which is your €100,000. And if you're successful in investing that and further validation, then you're into this HPSU conversation with Enterprise Ireland. And that's the typical route of engagement with Enterprise Ireland. It's also not uncommon for a business and a startup to come from the private sector and knock on the door of EI and say, listen, we're ready for road. We've got these guys over here who want to put in some money. We've got customers. We've got a product. Are you interested in stepping up and becoming part of this round one funding? And Enterprise Ireland are a significant and serious VC in their own right, and they can often just say, but we don't necessarily care that you didn't come to a New Frontiers program. We're interested. So so both options are valid, and both options are quite common. Okay, so I think I'm conscious that we're moving I'm conscious of time here, so I'm going to keep moving relatively quickly. But the LEOs and EIs and how you engage with them are important, and they're the 2 big ones. Now, it's not uncommon either for somebody. It's worth knowing that it's not uncommon for a business that has gone through a New Frontiers Phase 2 program to realize, I'm not an EI client at this point, and to go back to the LEOs and knock on the doors of the LEOs and say, I'm not going to be successful in the pre-seed thing. I'm probably going to stay local for the next couple of years. I'm not going to internationalize the business. I've got 2 people in the office. I'd really like to get another 2 and 3, and hopefully we can get into the next town, or we can launch a new product, or we can do what we need to do, whatever that might be. And at that point, it's okay for you to go back down to the local enterprise office and become a client of the local enterprise office and access priming grants. You're not locked in on this EI route, even if you've gone down the New Frontiers path. I will say that one of the lessons that's important to remember is that you can't double dip from a funding perspective. The New Frontiers Phase 2 program, which is 15K, is viewed as a feasibility grant, which is the LEO's feasibility grant. So you can't have 15K from the New Frontiers, 15K from a feasibility study, and so on. So like spending has to be, so you'd have to close out New Frontiers and then go back to the LEO if you're looking for a feasibility grant, and you have to close out New Frontiers and afterwards go back to the LEO if you're looking for a priming grant or else. So it's important that you can't have concurrent funding streams running in terms of accessing both Enterprise Ireland and the LEO. It would be the usual. It will be common that once you once you get past this early stage validation, like finding small pockets of money to get to MVP and validation, that you will become either a client of the LEO or a client of Enterprise Ireland, or a client of the LEO first and then outgrow the LEO and become a client of Enterprise Ireland. But that wouldn't be uncommon either. So okay, so that's what that environment, that's what that landscape looks like. So I want to talk just a little bit. There is other funding that's available that's not just this kind of startup HVSU ladder that's available from Enterprise Ireland. Enterprise Ireland have at the moment what's known as the Digital Transition Fund. Now, again, the catch for a lot of small businesses is this 10 or more employees. But if it is the case that you're an SME and you have 10 or more employees, there's funding there to support businesses that are doing things in this digital space. So, for example, there's a digital discovery, which is a consultant to come in for 7 days, and whereby they'll pay 80% of the €5,000 for the consultant to come in. They could look at the organization and they could say, we can implement lean principles here, and here's what the roadmap's going to be. And so that type of work is 80% funded. Digital process innovation, again, lean digital would be building on this initial digital discovery, which can be 50% up to €150,000. There's strategic consulting that's available, which is 50 or 80% up to €35,000. And then there's a digital marketing capability fund whereby the LEO will fund 50% of the spend of some external consultant to train an internal resource on the digital marketing activities that are in the organization. So it's worthwhile knowing that that fund is available if you are a business which has, if you are a business which is an SME successful in your, like a lot of digital marketing agencies at the moment will be working with SMEs and will be accessing the Digital Transition Fund for different projects that will be ongoing. So somebody's asked the question, can you run a feasibility grant and access innovation vouchers? Yeah, actually, I think if you were to be a LEO client running a feasibility grant, can you access the innovation vouchers? I wonder. The double dipping that's most common is being on a New Frontiers program and then trying to access a feasibility grant in the LEO, and that's definitely a no-no. It might be possible to access an innovation voucher, but again, it can't be double dipping. The spending can't be covered on both sides, and these organizations are reasonably well connected in terms of cross-checking. I would suspect that you might be able to do, so the way the innovation voucher works, so if it's Galway IT or some third level institute that's doing the work, it's the value of the 5,000. So they'll give you €5,000 worth of research, and they'll come back and give you a report, or they'll give you some kind of analysis of materials, whatever that might be, and it's produced from the third level institute and given to you. Whereas the feasibility grant is something you're spending the money and you're spending 100% of the money, and you're getting 50% back from the 50% back from the LEO. I'd say it's possible that you could run them concurrently, because they would definitely be two different activities. Because on one side, it's the third level institute that's doing this research for you, and on the other side, you're spending money from your own bank account on feasibility, and so the funding streams would be, the spending streams would be completely separate. But it would definitely be a question that would be worthwhile asking of your development officer in the local enterprise office when you're at the point of applying for the feasibility grant. Okay, so switching back into Enterprise Ireland, there is also available at the moment what's known as an Agile Innovation Fund, and it's broad. I've spoken to development, and that Agile Innovation Fund, whilst it's an EI pot of money, it's accessible to the local enterprise office. So if you're a client of the local enterprise office, you can access this Agile Innovation Fund, and it's quite broad. It can be anything in relation to R&D and innovation, and the key thing about it is 50% up to 150,000. The key thing about it is the priming grant and expansion grant won't cover time on employees that are already on payroll. Whereby the Agile grant, if you were hiring in people and putting them in a room and asking them in your SME and asking them to build a product, the Agile Innovation Fund will cover 50% of the wage costs, because like most R&D is essentially wage costs. It's like 90% of an R&D spend will be mostly wage costs, which is somebody looking at a problem and trying to crack the nut. So it's another one worth considering and having a conversation if you are a LEO client, if there might be something there on the Agile Innovation Fund. I haven't seen, like, I think if we've done one application the last year, maybe, I haven't seen a huge take up on it, but it is very broad. Any development officers I've spoken to, it's relatively broad in terms of what you can describe as R&D and what you can describe as innovation. But I think people just might not know about it. Okay, so I'm watching the clock. So next up is leader funding. If you're located out, so leader funding is basically rural development funding. It's regional development funding from Europe. And the key thing here is that leader operates in areas where the LEOs don't. So most LEOs will operate in towns and cities, And then in the regions, you'll have Leader. And Leader basically ran a 5-year program, which ended in 2020, I think. And they've been waiting on a pot of money to come since then. And they've had this intermediary funding, which is small amounts of money. But if you're based on the West Coast or up north, Leader could be an option for you to consider. So they've got 3 pillars in terms of what it is that they fund. They've got economic development, which really just means job creation. Social inclusion and rural development are kind of big rural development projects. But from an entrepreneur's perspective, you're looking at this first pillar, which is the economic development and job creation. So the reason why Leader is interesting is because it's a 50 to 70% of your marketing. So if you were to set up a factory or something like that in the West Coast in a Leader area, Leader would have significant funding there to support you, because it's likely that you would bring jobs to that space. And a new program came online in 23 that will run for the next 5 years. So they've got a new pot of money of 180 million to spend over the course of the next 5 years. So I won't dwell too much time in terms of what is in the Leader funding. It looks kind of, all of these organizations are really looking at people capital, not including movable assets, just plant and kind of office equipment and different types of equipment like that. So it's it's capital, people, and marketing. It's the 3 main buckets of cost with a little bit of overhead. So they all fund the same types of activities, except I will say that the paperwork required to engage with the local enterprise offices and EI at that higher level is more arduous than is required in Leader. You will probably need your business plan and your forecast, but it seems to be more straightforward to engage with them. And the other one that's worth noting is that if you're in a Gaeltacht area, you can access all the same supports that are available through the local enterprise offices through Údarás and Gaeltacht. And from a paperwork perspective, Údarás are very easy to deal with in terms of, I've actually found with the Údarás and Gaeltacht, I'm not quite sure whether they have the same conditions around funding in terms of the need to have the app. So often I've seen people with just a call to the local development officer and okay, go ahead and start spending money, and then come in with the invoices 6 months later. So it tends to be, I think it's because they probably know the people a bit better that are coming into them, whereas the LEOs are in cities and towns, and they have to be a little bit more weeding out of what applications are going to be useful and what are not. The next one that's worth considering is Intertrade Ireland. So Intertrade Ireland I've had several calls from development officers in Intertrade Ireland in the last 6 months, I'd say. Intertrade Ireland have funding. Like specifically the one that they have an Acumen program, which is designed to support businesses who are trying to foster opportunities, north-south opportunities. So if it is the case that you think you might have sales that you could build, or a southern business that could be trying to break into the market up north, for example, Acumen program, they would give you, again, they would give you 18,700 euro, 750 euros towards the salary of that person who's going to be working in the south, trying to figure out how to crack the Northern Irish market, maybe going up, taking meetings and going around shops or different things. But it's relatively broad, and if you are somebody who thinks you might be doing some kind of economic activity with the north, then it's worthwhile picking up the phone and having a conversation with them, because they have funding and they're willing to invest. Okay. If you are a food entrepreneur, Bord Bia is your place to go. Well, there's a partnership between Bord Bia and Teagasc, and there's one other partner there that slipped my mind. But really the one program that you want to look at is the FoodWorks program. So the FoodWorks program has all of Ireland's brightest and interesting food entrepreneurs. There's actually a BIA innovator jointly with Teagasc in Athenry. They've got startup programs, they've got accelerator programs, they've got feasibility grants, and they've got grant supports and so on, so on. So and what I will say is that, so if you are a food entrepreneur, the FoodWorks program is the place to look. Okay, so next up is we're into the startup space, which is the NDRC. So the NDRC was housed in Dogpatch Labs in Dublin up until last year, whereby the funding got spread across the country. So there are four incubation centres, which are Dogpatch Labs in Dublin, the Portershed in Galway, Republic of Work in Cork, RDI Hub in Kerry. And the types of supports that are available is they run founder weekends where you can come in and just figure out whether you've got something worth exploring. They have a pre-accelerator that runs for 6 weeks. and they have an accelerator that runs for a year, and it's a similar experience than to what you might get on a New Frontiers Phase 2 program. But success in that program is, again, it's this EI, it's this equity investment of €100,000 that they'll put into your business. I will say that if you log on to the NDRC, they do tend to attract Ireland's best and brightest entrepreneurs. So if you go and knock on the door, Dogpatch Labs in Dublin, like any of the startups that are going to be winning awards and scaling and growing, but many of the startups that are going to be scaling and winning awards, and you'll see them on the Sunday Business Post, a lot of them are coming out of some of these startup environments, and when some are coming from Phase 2 programs, but it's possible that you could move from a Phase 2 program and then look to get into the NDRC and get the equity investment that way. So and the mentors they have are like track records as long as your arm, and Ireland's best and brightest are in there supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs. Okay, so we're pushing for time. We're getting there. So I want to just talk about the paperwork. I've mentioned the process in terms of submitting for the local enterprise office. Microfinance Ireland, that loan is very straightforward in terms of so the application process for LEOs and Microfinance Ireland, you can just use their paperwork. If you're going to start looking towards the Enterprise Ireland, you're probably going to need your business plan with a financial forecast for 5 years. And Leader and Udaros, I would suggest that you can use their paperwork and just watch out for the drawdown process, which can be quite arduous. And my last slide for today's session is just to offer up some tips. Like it is the case that you have to pick a horse, and if you and not be double dipping on the funding. So as I mentioned before, I've talked about it previously. But the other thing to mention is that you do need to get approval first if you're engaging with the LEOs. And the other thing to consider is timing is also important. So like if you think about it, so the LEO budgets get renewed in January each year. So there's a new pot of money that comes online. So there's a big pot of money at the start of the year, and it diminishes. They'll hold a bit back, so they've got enough to deal with applications later in the year. But it's natural to know that the LEO's funding will diminish over the course of the year. So it's worthwhile keeping that in mind in terms of who you're going, if you're going to try and work with them. Leader has plenty of cash at the moment because their next 5-year program is after coming online. They'll have buckets of it until 3 or 4 years' time, and they'll start to run out of it because they'll have funded a lot of the projects that would have come in. EI seems to be just permanently have plenty of funding for especially the pre-seed programs and the investment and the VC stuff that they do. But yeah, it's worthwhile knowing, if they have funding, when they have funding, and knowing the cycles that exist. For example, the LEO process can take about a month to get everything locked down, and different things like that. So it's just worth feeling out. If you are relying on that funding coming in July 2023, well, when do you need to start the process? And the last thing to say is the first thing I said, is that it's very important that you see the local enterprise offices as a valued, or the EI or Udaros or Leader or whoever it might be, as a valued partner in your business, and who will become part of your success in the coming years, and who are looking for businesses whereby they can become part of their success in the coming years. And how you frame the conversation should be in that good faith. And I think sometimes people tend to rock up to LEO's Enterprise Ireland and treat them like ATMs, and then get really frustrated when the paperwork's too long and they can't get the money. And it just doesn't work like that. So I do think it's important that you consider what I've just said in that light and how you engage with them. But yeah, that's it, folks. I think I'm conscious that I've run a little bit over my time. It's my first time delivering this slide deck, so yeah, it'll probably tighten up if I run the same session in future weeks. But that's everything from me today. I would suggest that if you do want to get in touch with us, please feel free to sign up to our newsletters. Feel free to reach out and contact me directly or on Around Finance. It's the webinar link that's there at the moment. So you can find us on our website. And the other one I'll say is that if we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's usually a good place. So yeah, sign up to the Contact Us page, or connect, or contact, or feel free to reach out on LinkedIn and connect. And yeah, if you've got follow-up questions in relation to today's session, just don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. Do you have a service for you apply with me for funding and your fee, please? we actually don't have a service which is just built to support businesses access grants, but we do it as part of our wider services in the accountancy practice. But if you are interested in having a conversation, feel free to reach out and we can schedule a call. I would like to just take the opportunity once more just to say thank you all for joining. I appreciate it. It's been our first live webinar, and yeah, looking forward to more in the future. That's all for now. So thank you all very much.